Ross Burns, thanks very much for coming in. Let's start with Syria. President Bashar al-Assad has issued a decree authorising multi-partyism in Syria. Obviously, that is designed to appease the protesters. Is it genuine, do you think?
Well, I'm not quite sure what's in the decree. I don't know how convincing it might be. But I mean, I recall in the 80s there were other parties besides the Ba'ath Party, but they were in some kind of confederation with the Ba'ath. So they're probably using a mechanism like that, and I doubt whether one could really put much credence by the new measures, but not having seen them, I can't be more.
So, I mean, do you think it's more some sort of appeasement? Certainly France, as I mentioned, has called it a provocation.
Yes, I heard that on the headlines, but I don't know why they're saying that. But it could very well be because nothing ever came of the theoretical licensing of other parties in the past, and I think most of the measures of reform that the President has announced have never been followed through, and they've never been convincing.
Well, in its first clear condemnation, the UN Security Council has condemned the Syrian government for its deadly crackdown. Should we have expected anything more from the Council?
Well, the language is fairly mild, but it gets all the main points across, I think. But I think it's quite a remarkable thing to get so many countries. We're getting every member of the Security Council, including the permanent 5, except for Lebanon, which is in some vague way dissociated itself from the text. But to get so many countries making some pretty blunt points about the conduct of affairs in Syria, I think is quite remarkable. Whether it will have much effect, I very much doubt it. They seem to have got their head in the sand in Damascus, and they're just not listening to anyone.
Well, I mean, this is despite fears by some council members, for instance, Russia, which is an ally of Syria, that any action could lead to a Libya-style intervention. Can you understand where Russia's coming from, and would a Libya-style intervention be a possibility, do you think?
Well, I don't think anyone really has got a Libyan-style intervention in the back of their head. I just think Russia is putting up a bogeyman on that. I think it's not a possibility. The situation is far too complex to allow itself to be resolved in the way that the Libyan situation might be. It's just much more complicated, many more layers to it than there is in the case of Libya. And you have even less of a possibility of finding a credible alternative than you do in Libya.
How would you describe the situation there at the moment? Obviously, we're hearing reports of numerous deaths there as the violent crackdown continues. It's very hard to know how bad this is because reports, it's hard to get individual reports out of there. Journalists find it difficult to get into the country. Protesters have vowed to rally every evening during Ramadan after nightly prayers. It has the potential, obviously, to escalate from here.
Well, it can hardly escalate much more in terms of the number killed, in the sense that you've had incidents almost every day now with the death toll up above 100 in some cases. The thing that strikes me most is the extraordinary courage of the Syrians to face those bullets virtually every day. How long can it go on? Well, if you're prepared to display that sort of courage, I don't think there's any limit in that respect. That's what's so extraordinary about it. But I think whether it will move up another notch and affect the centre of the two major cities, Damascus and Aleppo, is the next critical question. I sort of think that the regime can probably hold the centre of those cities by just simply putting a security blanket over them. They're not going to allow another Tahrir Square in Damascus.
And perhaps not surprisingly, Mr. Assad has said violence is being met with violence. In other words, he is saying that armed criminal gangs are behind are backing up the protesters. Is there any credence to that?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think you can say that there isn't that element in some of these situations. And there are certainly enough opponents of the regime who've not been active in the past and not been very evident, but they've been there festering. The issues have been there festering below the surface. I think it's quite possible that they are behind some incidents, particularly the one at Jisr al-Shugur a few weeks ago, where it was clear that there was an attack on a military, an intelligence headquarters and a police post in the city. So, I mean, there was always some element of accuracy in the government's line, but I would say it's about 2 or 3% of the whole picture. But I think it's not what's driving these demonstrations now. It's just simply the anger of the people of Syria.
You were there some 25 years ago in the capacity as Australian ambassador. Are you surprised perhaps it's taken this long for protest against the regime to eventuate?
No, because when I first went there at the beginning of '84, which was not long after the Hama events in '82, the place was still absolutely stunned by what had happened in Hama. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody really even wanted to look that way when you were in the centre of Hama, to look over onto the hill that had been obliterated by the extraordinary bombardment that the city was subjected to. People just looked away from it, you know. So I'm not surprised. I wasn't surprised at the time that people weren't more vociferous or more open about their feelings. But I think as the decades went on, and then as Bashar al-Assad tried to say he was introducing some element of reform into the situation, and there were certain measures of economic progress, and you got a much more higher level of prosperity among the middle class, etc., then I think people started to throw over the old fears, and that's why, you know, I think with the example of Libya and Egypt and Tunisia, etc., some of the old fears were overthrown, and we got into a new dimension.
Well, can we just move to Egypt and the situation there briefly? The trial of Hosni Mubarak in Cairo. A lot of people surprised, even shocked, to see the president brought into the dock, albeit on a stretcher, on a hospital bed. Do you think he is likely to get a fair trial?
I must say that scene of the president on his litter or bed in the courtroom was quite extraordinary, and how that plays in the country I don't know. But I simply am not aware enough of the mechanics of the judicial system which has been set up under the army's guidance. But I'm quite surprised that he was actually brought into the courtroom.
Well, I mean, do you think there's a danger the military council...
That in itself is a big gesture.
Do you think there is a danger the military council will manipulate the trial, given they are under so much pressure at the moment? There's anger there that reform is taking far too long.
Yes, but I think they're also stuck with the impression that people have that the military could have done more to stop the suppression of the demonstrations earlier this year. So they are seen at the back of people's minds, I think, to be, to some extent, complicit.
Ross Burns, thanks very much.
Okay.